This is an interactive learning video designed to illustrate the importance of critical thinking in the diagnostic process. In other words, to make you think rather than just being told the answer.
Today we're working on a '08 Chevy Uplander. And when it came in, the basic complaint is that the check engine light is on, it's running bad, and it kind of bogs down, and there's black smoke coming out the tailpipe. So as you know, anytime the check engine light is on, the first thing we do is hook up the scanner and read the codes. Now the codes that we had was P0134, oxygen sensor circuit inactive, bank 1, P0171B, bank 1 system lean, and P0300 random misfire, and the last code was a P2A00, O2 sensor range performance problem.
We have 4 codes. Does that mean we have 4 problems? Well, could be.
So what do codes tell you? They provide information about the system or systems and the conditions under which the issue was first identified. They do not tell you what caused it. They simply tell you what identified it. To find out what caused it, you must use critical thinking.
One way to apply our critical thinking here is to see if the symptoms match the codes. Let's take a look.
So one of our codes is P0134. The heated oxygen sensor circuit is inactive in bank 1. So, could that cause it to run bad? Let's think about that. Inactive on bank 1? Well, possibly. I'd have to say it possibly could. How about bogged down? Could it cause it to bog down? Well, if it's bad enough and lasted long enough, I suppose it's possible. Well, how about black smoke out the tailpipe? Got to think about that for a minute. An inactive oxygen sensor on one bank? Well, again, if it's bad enough for long enough, I suppose it's possible. Now our next code is P0171B. Bank 1, the system is lean. So, could that cause it to run bad? Being lean? Well, possibly, if it's lean bad enough and long enough. Well, how about bogging down? Well, the same thing. If it's long enough and bad enough, a lean condition could cause it to bog down. So, how about black smoke out the tailpipe? Let me think about that. A lean condition causing black smoke out the tailpipe? Now that one's not very likely. So our next code is a P0300 or a random misfire. Well, could that cause it to run bad? Well, definitely it could cause it to run bad. And could it cause it to bog down? Well, again, definitely it could cause it to bog down. Well, how about black smoke out the tailpipe? A random misfire. Black smoke out the tailpipe? Well, I suppose it's a possibility. I'd have to say that's a possibility. Now let's look at our last code, P2A00, the heated oxygen sensor range performance problem. Could that cause it to run bad? Okay, I'd have to say possibly the same thing, if it's bad enough and long enough. How about bogging down? Well, again, possibility, I guess. I'd have to say that. How about black smoke out the tailpipe? If the oxygen sensor has got a range performance problem and it's bad enough and long enough, I'd have to say it's possible that it could be that case. So now, in the balance of things, the possibility that these 4 codes could be caused by one problem sure outweighs the unlikeliness of that being the problem. So we probably have 4 codes, but we only have one problem.
We have 4 codes, but 2 of those codes are O2 sensor codes. Why is that? And where is that answer? Well, for that, you're going to have to go to the service information, and here's what you'll find.
A good heated oxygen sensor should reach operating temperature within just a few seconds. If the PCM doesn't see a switching signal above a half a volt for 30 seconds, it will set code P0134. As the engine continues to run and warms up, the PCM continues to monitor the other data and knows that the engine is running and warmed up. but the O2 sensor doesn't switch for 100 seconds, which is a minute and a half, then it will set P2A00. The first code, P0134, is telling us that the O2 is indicating the engine is lean because the O2 is switching, but not above a half volt like it should be. And the second code, P2A00, tells us that the engine has run long enough that it should have been in closed loop by now, but it isn't, so it's still running in cold strategy, and that would explain the black smoke out the tailpipe.
So we got 4 codes. 2 of them are oxygen sensor related. One is a random misfire, and the fourth one is a lean situation. So what could this be?
If you are expanding your knowledge or instructing other students, it's time to stop and think about this. Here are a few questions for you. Use your critical thinking skills to help you answer them.
The code P0134. Explain exactly what insufficient activity means and when and what would cause this code to set. Code P0171. What does this code mean? And how does the PCM respond to a lean condition? P0300. How and why would a PCM designate the misfire as random as opposed to specific? And if the misfire was occasional, would it still set this code? Code P2A00. If this code is set because of a range performance problem, what is a correct range? And when would this code set?
Now it would be just too easy if I gave the answers right here. You wouldn't think about them. But I won't leave you hanging. I have the answers posted on this video's resource page on my website at realfixesrealfast.com. The link is in the comments.
Obviously what we like to do is kind of think it through first and see what it could be. Oxygen sensor problem and a lean code, that could be related. And the fact that we've got a random misfire, if the engine is running lean, it could develop into be a random rather than a specific misfire. So when we stop to think about these, an oxygen sensor, a random misfire, and a lean situation, it all is kind of making sense that it's pointing towards the oxygen sensor being a problem.
Is this a guess or evidence? Now remember, we need to let the evidence lead us to the problem.
Now it'd be pretty easy here just to kind of jump to conclusions and say let's throw an oxygen sensor in it. But really the smart thing is to do is prove this, find the evidence. So we're going to use a Genesis this time and actually look at the data stream. Now we've got all of our data parameters showing, and we've kind of pre-selected here long-term, short-term, oxygen sensor 1.1 and oxygen sensor 1.2 at the very top. And we can watch our data over here. Now we actually like to graph some of these, so I'm going to go up to the oxygen sensor 1.1. So the only one we're actually going to be graphing is the oxygen sensor bank 1 sensor 1. Right there. Now we can see that it is switching. If you're not familiar with the Genesis, this is the live data, and this lighter portion is kind of like a magnifying glass. It's zoomed in. But we can see that we're switching, but if we look over here at our data, you can see that we're really only switching 0.3. So the negative is 0.02, not the negative, but the low range, and the highest it's doing is 0.37. Now we're going to accelerate it a little bit and see what happens as we rev the engine. Now when we just stepped on the accelerator, we flooded it with fuel momentarily, and the oxygen sensor should have gone up to 0.9 and stayed there, but you can see that it didn't. It just stayed at 0.3. So the oxygen sensor is switching, but it's only switching between 0 and 0.3. For those of you who might need a little refresher on oxygen sensors, a normal oxygen sensor should read between 0 and 1 volt. Most typically, it'll range between like 0.1 and 0.2, all the way up to either 0.8 or 0.9. It should be fluctuating like that. And what ours is reading is fluctuating between like 0.1 and 0.3. So it is switching, but it's switching at the low range, and it is never crossing above half a volt, 0.5. A good oxygen sensor should switch above and below a half a volt many times, just over and over again. Now ours is not. Ours is staying below a half a volt.
So is the O2 sensor any good? Well, one of the ways that we test an O2 sensor that is switching but not above a half a volt like it should be, and it's reporting a constant lean condition, is to try and drive it rich, see if we can make it report rich. And we do that with a propane enrichment test, where we take propane, which is a fuel, add it to the incoming air, which should make the O2 sensor see it and start reporting rich. And then we take the propane away and it should report lean again. You know, I've always said, let the evidence lead you to the problem. Well, remember the black smoke out the tailpipe? Well, that is evidence and can only be caused from a rich running engine. And look at the fuel trims. They're negative. The PCM is pulling fuel away, even though the oxygen sensors are reporting that the engine is lean and therefore indicate that you should be adding fuel. So because of the evidence, the black smoke and the negative fuel trims, a propane enrichment test at this point would not be indicated. Hopefully you're beginning to see how important critical thinking is. I'll continue this video in part 2, but don't forget to check the resource page for this video at my website, realfixesrealfast.com.